The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window as I sat at the breakfast table, staring at the empty dog bed in the corner where Max used to sleep. 3 months had passed since my husband Robert died from his heart attack, and the silence in our house still felt deafening. But what made everything worse was that Max, Robert's beloved golden retriever, wasn't there to fill that silence anymore. You won't believe what happened to me, so please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what country you're watching from. My name is Elena Ramirez. I'm 65 years old, and I never imagined that losing my husband would lead to losing his dog too. Robert had rescued Max 5 years ago, and that dog became his constant companion. They'd spend hours in the garden together, Max following Robert around like a devoted shadow. When Robert passed away suddenly, I was drowning in grief, barely able to function, let alone take care of a large, energetic dog. That's when my best friend, Patricia Coleman, stepped in. Patricia and I had been friends for over 20 years. She lived just 10 minutes away and had always been the practical one in our friendship. The day after Robert's funeral, she showed up at my door with her usual take-charge attitude. "Elena, honey, you can barely take care of yourself right now," Patricia had said, her graying blonde hair pulled back in her signature neat bun. "Let me take Max for a few weeks, just until you get back on your feet. He needs walks, attention, and you need space to grieve." At the time, it seemed like a godsend. I was struggling to eat, sleep, or even get dressed some days. The idea of walking Max twice a day felt impossible. So I agreed, thinking it would be temporary. But here I was, 3 months later, and Patricia kept making excuses every time I asked about bringing Max home. "Elena, are you sure you're ready?" she'd say whenever I brought it up. "You're still so fragile." "Max is doing great with me. He's got my big backyard, and I've established such a good routine with him." The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my daughter, Sophia Ramirez, calling from her apartment across town. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" Sophia's voice carried that gentle concern she'd had ever since her father died. At 38, my daughter had been my rock through this whole ordeal, checking on me almost daily. "I'm okay, mija," I said, though my voice probably betrayed me. "I've been thinking about Max again. I really want him to come home, but Patricia keeps putting me off." There was a pause on the other end. "Mom, you've been saying this for weeks. Have you been direct with her? Maybe she doesn't realize how much you need him back?" "I've tried, but she always has a reason why it's not the right time. Yesterday she said he'd gotten used to her house, and moving him again might be traumatic for him." "That doesn't sound right," Sophia said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Max belonged to Dad, which means he belongs with you now. Patricia doesn't get to make that decision." After hanging up with Sophia, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I stepped outside, I saw my neighbor Dorothy Chen working in her front garden. Dorothy was about my age and had moved to the neighborhood about 2 years ago. We'd become friendly, bonding over our shared love of gardening and afternoon tea. "Good morning, Elena," Dorothy called out, wiping soil from her hands on her gardening apron. "How are you holding up today?" "Oh, you know," I said, walking over to the low fence that separated our properties. "Some days are harder than others. I keep thinking about getting Max back from Patricia, but she seems reluctant to return him." Dorothy's expression shifted, and she glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Elena, I hope you don't mind me asking, but when exactly did Patricia say she'd bring Max back?" "Well, she never gave me a specific date. She just said when I was feeling better and ready to handle a dog again." Dorothy frowned. "I don't want to speak out of turn, but I saw Patricia at the pet store last week. She was buying one of those expensive orthopedic dog beds and telling the cashier about her golden retriever. She was talking about Max like he was permanently hers. My stomach dropped. What exactly did she say? She mentioned how she'd finally found the perfect dog for her lifestyle, and how golden retrievers were such wonderful companions for someone her age. She even asked about training classes for new dog owners. Dorothy hesitated. Elena, it sounded like she was planning on keeping him. The rest of our conversation was a blur. I thanked Dorothy and walked back inside, my mind racing. Could Patricia really be planning to keep Max permanently? The woman who had been my closest friend for 2 decades? That afternoon, I called Sophia back and told her about my conversation with Dorothy. Mom, this is getting serious, Sophia said, and I could hear the anger building in her voice. You need to go over there and demand Max back. Today. But what if I'm wrong? What if Patricia really is just trying to help, and I'm being paranoid because I'm still grieving? Mom, listen to me. Dad loved that dog more than anything. Max is part of Dad's memory, part of what you two shared together. No real friend would keep you separated from him this long, no matter what her intentions were. That evening, I finally worked up the courage to drive to Patricia's house. When I pulled into her driveway, I could see Max through the living room window. My heart leaped seeing his golden coat and familiar profile. He looked healthy and well cared for, but that didn't change the fact that he belonged with me. Patricia answered the door with a smile that seemed a little too bright. Elena, what a surprise. I wasn't expecting you. Patricia, we need to talk about Max. I want him to come home with me today. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, Elena, are you sure that's wise? You've been doing so well lately, and I'd hate for you to take on too much too soon. Why don't you come in for some tea, and we can discuss this properly? As I followed her inside, Max bounded over to me, his tail wagging furiously. He pressed his nose against my hand and whined softly, the same sound he used to make when Robert would come home from work. In that moment, I knew Dorothy had been right. This dog remembered me, remembered our life together, and he wanted to come home. See how excited he gets around visitors? Patricia said, but there was something forced about her casual tone. He's always been such a social dog. Patricia, I'm not a visitor. I'm Max's owner, and I want to take him home. The air in the room shifted, and I saw something in Patricia's eyes I'd never seen before. A hardness, a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. Elena, I think we need to consider what's best for Max here. He's settled in beautifully. He has his routines, his favorite spots in the house. Uprooting him again could be cruel. Cruel? I felt my voice rising. What's cruel is keeping a woman's dog from her when she's already lost her husband. Suddenly, the pieces aligned. Patricia's expression hardened further, and she crossed her arms. Elena, I've been thinking about this a lot, and honestly, I'm not sure you're in the right state of mind to care for a dog. You've been so depressed, so unstable since Robert died. Max needs consistency. The words hit me like a physical blow. Unstable? Patricia, I've been grieving my husband. That's normal. That's human. Is it normal to not leave your house for weeks? Is it normal to ignore phone calls from people who care about you? Elena, I've watched you fall apart, and I can't in good conscience let Max suffer because of it. I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. This was my best friend, the woman who had held me while I cried at Robert's funeral, who had brought me casseroles and sat with me through the darkest nights. Now she was speaking to me like I was a stranger, like I was unfit. Patricia, Max is my dog. Robert left him to me. You have no right to decide what's best for him. Actually, I think I do. Patricia walked over to a drawer and pulled out a folder. I've been documenting everything, Elena. Your inability to care for yourself, let alone a pet. The times you forgot to eat, forgot to shower, forgot basic things. I have photos of your house when I came to check on you. The mess, the neglect. My hands began to shake. You photographed my house? While I was grieving? I photographed evidence of your mental state. Max deserves better than that chaos. Max whined softly beside me, sensing the tension. I reached down to pet him, and he leaned into my touch, just like he used to do with Robert. The familiar weight of him against my leg gave me strength. Patricia, please. You're scaring me. This isn't you. This isn't the friend I've known for 20 years. Maybe you never really knew me at all, Elena. Maybe I've just been cleaning up your messes for decades, and now I'm finally standing up for what's right. The room felt like it was spinning. My messes? What are you talking about? Your marriage wasn't as perfect as you pretend it was. Robert used to complain to me about you, about how needy you were, how dependent. He said he felt trapped sometimes. The words were like knives, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. But something about the way she said it, the cruel satisfaction in her voice, made me pause. Robert had never been the type to confide relationship problems to anyone, especially not Patricia, whom he'd always found a bit intrusive. I don't believe you, I said quietly. Believe what you want. The fact remains that Max is better off with me. I can provide for him properly. I'm stable, financially secure, emotionally healthy. I looked around Patricia's pristine living room, at the expensive dog bed in the corner, the fancy toys scattered about. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On her mantel, beside her own family photos, was a picture of Max. But it wasn't just any picture. It was one from our house, from our mantel, one that Robert had taken of Max in our backyard last summer. Patricia, I said slowly, where did you get that photograph? She followed my gaze and for the first time looked uncomfortable. Oh, that. I thought you might want me to have something to remember Max by, so I took it when I was helping clean up after the funeral. You stole a photograph from my house? I didn't steal anything. I was helping you organize, and you were in no state to make decisions about what was important. But as I looked closer, I saw more things that seemed familiar. A small ceramic bowl that looked exactly like one Robert had bought for Max's water. A leash hanging by the door that I could have sworn was hanging in our garage the last time I'd looked. Patricia, have you been taking things from my house? Don't be ridiculous, Elena. You're being paranoid again. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This kind of erratic thinking, these accusations. It's not healthy. But I wasn't backing down anymore. The fog of grief was lifting, replaced by a clear, cold anger. I want to go through my house, room by room, and I want you to come with me. Right now. That's absurd. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Max. Then I'll go alone. And I'll remember every single thing that's missing. Patricia's confident facade cracked slightly. Elena, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Why don't you go home and sleep on this? We can talk tomorrow when you're feeling more rational. I knelt down and clipped the leash I'd brought onto Max's collar. He stood immediately, tail wagging, ready to follow me anywhere. I'm taking my dog home, Patricia. And then I'm going to figure out exactly what else you've taken from me. If you walk out that door with Max, our friendship is over. I paused at the threshold, Max beside me, both of us ready to leave. I think our friendship ended the day you decided my grief made me unworthy of my husband's dog. As I loaded Max into my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But it wasn't fear making me shake now. It was rage, because I was starting to realize that what Dorothy had seen was just the beginning. When I got home and walked through my house with Max at my side, my worst suspicions were confirmed. Walking through my house with Max padding beside me, I felt like I was seeing my own home through new eyes. In the kitchen, the little ceramic treat jar Robert had bought for Max was gone from the counter. I'd thought I'd simply misplaced it during one of my bad days, but now I knew better. In the living room, Max's favorite blanket was missing from his usual spot on the couch. The expensive orthopedic dog bed Robert had bought when Max started showing signs of hip stiffness? Gone. Even Max's vaccination records had disappeared from the folder in our desk drawer. I sank onto the couch, Max immediately jumping up beside me and resting his head on my lap. Patricia hadn't just taken my dog. She'd been systematically removing every trace of him from my life, probably planning this for months. How many times had she come over under the guise of helping me, only to steal pieces of Max's life? My phone rang, startling both Max and me. It was Mom. "Elena, honey, how did it go? Do you have Max back?" "I have him," I said, my voice hollow. "But Mom, it's worse than I thought. She's been stealing from me. Max's things, photos, who knows what else." There was a long pause before Mom spoke again, and when she did, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "That woman has been manipulating you since the funeral. I should have said something sooner." "What do you mean?" "All those times she insisted on helping you, on being the one to coordinate things. She was very controlling about who could visit and when. She told people you were too fragile for visitors, that they should go through her first. Your cousin Janet wanted to bring you dinner last month, and Patricia told her you weren't ready for company yet." The room seemed to spin slightly. "She never told me Janet called." "Because she was isolating you, sweetie. Making herself indispensable while cutting you off from everyone else. It's a classic manipulation tactic." As if summoned by our conversation, there was a sharp knock at my front door. Max's ears perked up, and he gave a low growl. Through the window, I could see Patricia's car in my driveway. "She's here," I whispered to Mom. "Do not let her in that house." But Patricia was already using her key, the one I'd given her after Robert's funeral when I thought I needed someone to check on me. The front door opened, and Patricia marched in like she owned the place. "Elena, we need to talk. You can't just take Max like that. I've been caring for him for months, and you traumatized him by forcing him to leave." Max hadn't moved from my side, his body warm and solid against me. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "You stole him?" I said quietly. "You stole my husband's dog." "I saved him from a woman who couldn't take care of herself, let alone a living creature." "Mom, can you hear this?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Patricia's eyes widened as Mom's voice filled the room. "Patricia Jean Morrison, you should be ashamed of yourself. Taking advantage of a grieving woman, stealing from her home." "I don't have to listen to this," Patricia snapped, but she looked shaken that Mom was involved. "Actually, you do," Mom continued, her teacher voice coming out in full force. "Because Elena has witnesses now. That neighbor Dorothy saw you taking Max without permission. I'm sure she'd be happy to tell anyone who asks about what she witnessed." Patricia's face went pale. "You wouldn't." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of my old self returning. "Try me. Bring Max's things back. All of them. The bed, the blanket, the treat jar, his medical records, everything. And I want my house key back." "Elena, please. We've been friends for 15 years. "Friends don't steal from each other," Friends don't isolate each other. Friends don't lie and manipulate someone when they're at their lowest point. Patricia looked around the room desperately, as if searching for something that would give her back control of the situation. I was trying to help you. No, I said, standing up with Max beside me. You were trying to help yourself to my life. The silence that followed my words felt like a dam bursting inside me. I hadn't spoken with such clarity or conviction since before Robert died, and it surprised me as much as it seemed to shock Patricia. Max pressed closer to my leg, as if sensing the shift in my energy. Elena, you're being dramatic, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its usual commanding tone. I've been taking care of you both. Who else was going to do it? Your mother lives 3 states away, and you were barely functioning. That wasn't your decision to make, I said, and I could hear the strength returning to my voice with each word. Taking Max, screening my calls, deciding who I could and couldn't see. None of that was helping me. It was controlling me. Patricia's face flushed red. I spent my own money on his food, his vet bills. I rearranged my entire schedule around walking him, feeding him. And this is how you thank me? Through the phone, Mom's voice cut in sharp and clear. Patricia, did Elena ask you to pay those bills? Did she ask you to take him in the first place? She wasn't capable of asking for anything. She was practically catatonic. The words hit me like a physical blow, partly because there was truth in them. I had been lost in those early weeks, barely eating, barely speaking. But hearing Patricia weaponize my grief, use my lowest moments to justify what she'd done, ignited something fierce inside me. I was grieving, I said, my voice steady despite the tears starting to form. I lost my husband of 12 years, Patricia. I was supposed to be falling apart. But that didn't give you the right to take the one thing Robert left me that could provide comfort. Max seemed to sense my emotion and nuzzled his head against my hand. The simple gesture nearly undid me. This was what I'd been missing. This wordless understanding. This connection to Robert through the creature he'd loved most. Patricia noticed the exchange, and something flickered across her face. For a moment, I thought it might be remorse. But then her expression hardened again. Fine. You want him back so badly? What happens when you fall apart again? When you can't take care of him properly? I'll be the one getting the call about a neglected dog. That's enough. Mom's voice carried all the authority of her decades as an educator. Patricia, I'm flying out this weekend. Elena shouldn't have to deal with this alone. I felt a rush of gratitude toward Mom, but also a flicker of concern. Mom, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I should have come sooner, but someone convinced me you needed space. The accusation in Mom's tone was unmistakable. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. I never said she didn't want to see you. You said she wasn't ready for visitors. You said she was too fragile for phone calls. You made it sound like any contact would set back her recovery. Listening to this exchange, pieces of the last few months began rearranging themselves in my mind. The isolation I'd felt hadn't been entirely self-imposed. Patricia had been the gatekeeper, filtering my world down to just her presence, her version of what I needed. I need you to leave, I said to Patricia, surprised by how calm I sounded. Bring Max's things back tomorrow, along with my key. Elena, please, let's talk about this rationally. I am being rational. For the first time in months, I'm thinking clearly. I walked to the front door and opened it. I need space to figure out how to move forward, and I can't do that with you controlling every aspect of my life. Patricia stood there for a long moment, looking between me and Max. Her face cycled through several expressions: anger, hurt, something that might have been genuine concern. Finally, she walked toward the door. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "When you realize how much I've been doing for you, how much you actually need help, you'll regret pushing me away." After she left, I sank back onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Max immediately jumped up beside me, something he'd never been allowed to do at Patricia's house, and laid his head across my lap. "Mom?" I said to the phone. "I'm still here, sweetheart. Was I really that bad, those first few weeks?" There was a pause. "You were grieving, Elena. You were exactly as broken as you should have been after losing Robert. But that didn't mean you were incompetent or needed someone to take over your life." I buried my fingers in Max's fur, feeling his steady breathing against my legs. "I don't know if I can do this alone." "You're not alone. You have me, you have Max, and you have yourself. The you that just stood up to Patricia? That person is stronger than you think." As if on cue, Max lifted his head and looked toward the back door, tail wagging slightly. It took me a moment to realize what he was telling me. He needed to go out. It was such a normal, everyday thing, but it felt monumental. He was asking me, trusting me to take care of his needs. "Mom, I should go. Max needs his evening walk." "Of course. Call me tomorrow?" "I will." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, looking at Max's expectant face. The leash was still hanging by the back door where Robert used to keep it. I hadn't touched it since the funeral, but as I reached for it, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Patricia's car was back, and this time she wasn't alone. My heart hammered as I watched Patricia get out of the driver's side. From the passenger seat emerged a tall figure I recognized immediately. My father-in-law, Robert's dad, George. Even from a distance, I could see the grim set of his shoulders, the way he adjusted his glasses before walking up my driveway. Patricia had called in reinforcements. Max whined softly, sensing my tension. I found myself stroking his ears, drawing comfort from his warm presence. Just minutes ago, I'd been ready to take him on his first walk with me since Robert died. Now I felt like I was preparing for battle. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking. George's knock. I'd recognize it anywhere. Authoritative, demanding attention. "Elena, we need to talk." George's voice boomed through the door. "Patricia's told me what's happening here, and frankly, I'm concerned." I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar shrinking sensation. George had always been intimidating, even when Robert was alive to buffer his intensity. He was a retired military officer who'd run his household and his business with iron discipline. After Robert died, he'd made it clear he thought I was too fragile, too emotional to handle practical matters. "Elena, please," Patricia called out. "I brought George because I'm worried about you. The way you spoke to me earlier, that wasn't like you." That stung, because part of me wondered if she was right. The Elena from 6 months ago would never have told anyone to leave, would never have demanded her key back. I'd always been the accommodating one, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone comfortable. But as I looked down at Max, saw his trusting brown eyes fixed on mine, I felt something harden in my chest. This wasn't about who I used to be. This was about who I needed to become. I opened the door, but left the chain latch engaged, creating just a small gap. "George, Patricia." I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. "This isn't a good time." George stepped closer to the door, his gray eyebrows drawn together in disapproval. "Elena, I can see the dog right there behind you. Patricia explained how you've been confused about the arrangements you made. This kind of erratic behavior, changing your mind about agreements, It's concerning. I never agreed to give Max away permanently, I said, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. Those first weeks after the funeral were such a blur of casseroles and condolence cards and people making decisions for me. Had I agreed to something I didn't remember? You were in no state to take care of a large dog, Patricia said through the gap. You weren't taking care of yourself, let alone a pet. We all agreed it was temporary until you got back on your feet. But you never asked if I was ready to take him back, I replied. You just kept extending the timeline, making decisions for me. George's face reddened slightly. Because you clearly weren't ready. Patricia tells me you haven't been working, you're barely functioning. A dog needs consistency, discipline, proper care. What happens when you have another breakdown? The word breakdown hit me like a slap. Is that what everyone thought I'd had? Maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe those weeks of not showering, of living on whatever food people brought over, of crying until I was too exhausted to cry anymore, maybe that was a breakdown. I'm getting better, I said quietly. Are you? George challenged. Patricia says you're isolating yourself, refusing help, making impulsive decisions. Taking the dog back when you're still unstable? That's not fair to the animal. Max must have heard his distress in my voice because he came to stand beside me, his solid presence against my leg. I felt him lean into me slightly, and something about that simple gesture of support strengthened my resolve. I'm not unstable, I said, louder this time. I'm grieving. There's a difference. Elena. Patricia's voice took on that patient, condescending tone I was beginning to hate. Remember how you used to call me crying at 2 a.m? Remember how you couldn't even figure out how to pay your bills? You needed help then, and you still need help now. The terrible thing was that she wasn't lying. I had called her crying. I had been overwhelmed by basic tasks that Robert had always handled. But as I stood there, I realized something crucial. Needing help wasn't the same as needing someone to take over my entire life. George, I said, looking directly at him through the gap in the door. Did Patricia tell you I've been handling my own bills for the last month? Did she tell you I've been grocery shopping, keeping the house clean, taking care of myself? His expression flickered slightly, uncertainty replacing some of the stern confidence. She told me you fired your grief counselor, he said, but with less conviction than before. I graduated from grief counseling. There's a difference. I took a deep breath. I know you both think you're helping, but I need to figure out how to live my life without Robert. And Max is part of that life. Patricia pressed closer to the door crack. But what if you have setbacks? What if you stop taking care of him properly? I've been the one vet appointments, buying his food, making sure he gets exercise. Do you even know when his vaccinations are due? The question hit home because I didn't know. I'd been so focused on getting him back that I hadn't thought about the practical aspects of his care. Doubt began creeping back in, that familiar voice whispering that maybe everyone else did know better than I did. But then Max did something that surprised everyone. He barked, not aggressively, but firmly, and pawed at the door. It was exactly what he used to do when Robert came home from work, his way of demanding attention and pets and acknowledgement. He wants to go for his walk, I realized out loud. He's telling me it's time for his evening walk. Through the door gap, I could see Patricia and George exchange a look. Elena, we're not done talking about this, George said sternly. But I was looking at Max, remembering what my mother had said about the woman who had stood up to Patricia. That woman was stronger than I thought. Yes, we are, I said, and gently closed the door. I heard them talking in hushed voices on the other side of the door, but I couldn't make out the words. Max looked up at me expectantly, his tail wagging slightly. He really did want his walk, and the normalcy of that simple need gave me strength. I found his leash hanging by the back door. Patricia had apparently brought some of his things with her. As I clipped it to his collar, Max's whole body wiggled with excitement. This was familiar territory for both of us. Robert and I had walked him together countless times along the same neighborhood routes. When I opened the front door to leave, Patricia and George were still standing on my porch, looking uncertain for the first time since they'd arrived. "Where are you going?" Patricia asked, her voice higher than usual. "For a walk with my dog," I said simply, stepping past them. George cleared his throat. "Elena, we're not finished with this conversation." I paused on the front steps. Max was already pulling gently toward the sidewalk, eager to explore and sniff his usual spots. "George, I appreciate that you care about me. I really do. But this isn't your decision to make." "It's not yours either if you're not thinking clearly," he replied, but there was less certainty in his voice than before. Patricia moved to block my path down the walkway. "You can't just walk away from this discussion. We have legitimate concerns about your ability to care for Max properly." The old Elena would have crumbled under that direct confrontation. The old Elena would have apologized and handed over the leash. But as Max pressed against my leg, warm and solid and real, I felt something shift inside me. "Patricia, you've been my best friend for 15 years. You held my hand at Robert's funeral. You brought me casseroles when I couldn't cook." I looked directly into her eyes. "But that doesn't give you the right to steal my dog and decide what's best for my life." Her face flushed red. "I didn't steal him. I rescued him from a situation where he wasn't being properly cared for." "By whose definition?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Because Max seems perfectly healthy and happy to me." George stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between Patricia and me. "Look, maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement, shared custody or something." I felt my mother's presence in my mind, that quiet strength she'd shown when dealing with difficult people. "George, Max isn't a child going through a divorce. He's my dog. Robert left him to me, not to a committee." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "Robert left him to the woman he married, not the mess you became after he died. Do you think he would want Max living with someone who cries herself to sleep every night and can barely function?" The words hit like physical blows, partly because there was truth in them. I had been a mess. I had cried myself to sleep. I had barely functioned for weeks. But as I stood there with Max's leash in my hand, I realized something important. "You're right, Patricia. I was a mess. But grief isn't permanent, and neither was my inability to cope. People heal. People learn. People grow stronger." Max barked once, as if agreeing with me, and the sound broke some of the tension. My mother's voice came from behind them, and I turned to see her walking up the front path. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what she was interrupting. "Mom, how long have you been here?" "Long enough to hear raised voices from inside the house." She looked at Patricia and George with polite but cool acknowledgement. "Hello, Patricia. George?" Patricia straightened, clearly trying to regain her composure. "Mrs. Chen, we were just discussing Elena's situation with Max." "Were you?" My mother's voice carried that deceptively mild tone that had always meant trouble when I was growing up. "And what conclusion did you reach?" George shifted uncomfortably. "We're concerned about Elena's ability to properly care for a pet right now." My mother looked at Max, who was sitting calmly beside me, then back at George. He looks well cared for to me. Clean, healthy, alert. What exactly are your concerns based on? The question hung in the evening air, and I realized that neither Patricia nor George had a concrete answer that would sound reasonable to an outsider. Patricia cleared her throat, clearly flustered by my mother's direct question. Well, Elena has been struggling. She missed work for weeks, barely answered her phone, and when I came to check on Max, the house was what? My mother asked, stepping closer to our small group. Max's tail wagged as she approached, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. It was messy, Patricia admitted. Dishes in the sink, laundry everywhere. Elena was still in her pajamas at 3 p.m. I see. My mother straightened up, and I could see that familiar spark in her eyes that meant she was about to make a point. And tell me, Patricia, when your father passed away 5 years ago, how long did it take you to feel like yourself again? George looked surprised. Patricia, you never told me about your father. Patricia's face flushed deeper. That's different. That was my father, not a spouse. You're right, my mother said evenly. It was different. You had 3 months off work, and your sister had to come stay with you because you couldn't manage basic daily tasks. But Elena's situation is somehow less understandable? I stared at my mother, then at Patricia. You took 3 months off work? Patricia's composure was crumbling fast. I had accumulated sick leave, and I didn't have a dog to take care of. No, but you had 2 cats, my mother continued relentlessly. Who your sister fed and cleaned up after because you couldn't bring yourself to do it. George, did you know Patricia gave her cats to a shelter temporarily because she felt she couldn't care for them properly? George turned to look at his wife with obvious surprise. Patricia, is that true? This isn't about me, Patricia snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. This is about what's best for Max. I felt something shift inside me, a clarity I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Patricia, why didn't you tell me about your father? About how hard it was for you? Because that's not the point, she said, but her voice was quieter now. Isn't it? I stepped closer, Max staying faithfully at my side. You went through this. You know how impossible everything feels, how just getting dressed seems like climbing a mountain. And instead of helping me through it, you decided I was failing? George was looking between Patricia and me with growing understanding. Patricia, when you said Elena wasn't coping well, I thought you meant she was being irresponsible. You made it sound like she was neglecting Max. She was, Patricia insisted, but her voice wavered. She couldn't even take care of herself. My mother moved to stand beside me, a united front. Patricia, I've been checking on Elena every few days since Robert died. Yes, she was struggling. Yes, the house was messy, and she stayed in pajamas sometimes. But Max was never neglected. His food bowl was always full, he was always clean, and Elena walked him every single day, even on the days she could barely walk herself. How do you know that? Patricia challenged. Because I walked with them, my mother replied simply. Every morning at 7 a.m., rain or shine. Elena might not have been showering regularly or doing dishes, but she never once missed Max's morning walk. I felt tears building in my eyes, remembering those morning walks. They had been the only thing that got me out of bed some days, the only routine that felt sacred enough to maintain. George was studying his wife's face carefully. Patricia, what's really going on here? You've never acted like this before? Patricia's hands were shaking now. Robert asked me to watch out for her. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure Elena was okay. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? He was worried about the diabetes complications, Patricia continued, her voice breaking slightly. He knew there was a chance he might not have much time, and he made me promise to take care of you if something happened. My mother's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. And you interpreted taking care of Elena as taking her dog? I thought... Patricia stopped, running her hands through her hair. I thought she was falling apart completely. I thought Robert would want me to step in and make the hard decisions she couldn't make. George reached for his wife's hand. Patricia, you should have talked to me about this, about all of this. I was trying to honor his request, she said defensively. I was trying to help. I felt Max lean against my leg, his solid warmth grounding me. Patricia, Robert did ask you to watch out for me, but taking Max away wasn't watching out for me. It was making one of the hardest times in my life even harder. But you weren't taking care of him properly, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction now. According to who? I asked. Because Max seems to disagree. As if on cue, Max looked up at me and barked once, his tail wagging. Then he walked over to Patricia and sat in front of her, tilting his head in that way he had when he wanted attention. Patricia looked down at him, and I saw her face crumble slightly. He's gained weight, she said quietly. 3 pounds, I confirmed. The vet said he was probably stress eating because he missed his routine. George squeezed Patricia's hand. Honey, maybe we should talk about this. Really talk about it. My mother stepped forward. Patricia, I understand that you were trying to help Elena in the way you thought was best. But grief isn't something you can manage or control from the outside. It's something you have to live through. Patricia looked at Max, then at me, and I saw something break in her expression. I thought I was doing what Robert would have wanted. Robert would have wanted you to support me, I said gently. Not make decisions for me. The evening air was growing cooler, and I could see neighbors starting to turn on their porch lights. We had been standing in my driveway for nearly an hour, but it felt like something important was finally happening. Patricia took a shaky breath. I missed him too, you know. Robert was like a brother to me. I know, I said, and I realized I really did know. Patricia and Robert had been friends since college, long before I came into the picture. Maybe, George said carefully, we should all go inside and talk about this properly, figure out what Robert really would have wanted. But as we started to move toward the house, Patricia stopped suddenly. There's something else, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I haven't told you about the day Robert died. My blood went cold at Patricia's words. The day Robert died. What could she possibly have to tell me about that day that she hadn't already shared? Max seemed to sense the shift in energy. He moved back to my side, pressing against my leg again. I reached down automatically to stroke his head, needing the comfort as much as he did. What do you mean? I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Patricia looked at George, then at my mother, as if seeking permission or support. George nodded encouragingly, while my mother stepped closer to me. We should go inside, my mother said quietly. This sounds like something that needs to be said properly. I led everyone into the living room, the same room where I'd spent so many sleepless nights after Robert's funeral, staring at the empty spot where Max's bed used to be. Now, Max immediately went to that exact spot and settled down, as if reclaiming his territory. Patricia sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. George sat beside her, close enough to offer support but giving her space to speak. My mother chose the chair next to mine, positioning herself like a quiet guardian. "The day Robert had his heart attack," Patricia began, her voice shaky. "He called me that morning." I felt my chest tighten. Robert had called her the morning he died? This was news to me. "He did?" "Yes. It was around 10 in the morning. You were at work." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "He said he'd been having some chest pains, but he didn't want to worry you. He asked if I thought he should go to the doctor." The room felt like it was spinning slightly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him yes, of course he should go. I offered to drive him, but he said he'd wait until you got home for lunch." Patricia's voice broke. "I should have insisted. I should have driven over there and forced him to go to the emergency room right then." My mother reached over and took my hand. "Patricia, you can't blame yourself for Robert's heart attack." "But I do," Patricia said, tears flowing freely now. "And when he died that afternoon, I kept thinking about that phone call, about how I failed him when he needed help." I stared at her, trying to process this information. Robert had been having chest pains that morning and hadn't told me. He'd called Patricia instead. The thought stung, but I tried to push past the hurt to understand what she was really saying. "Is that why you took Max?" I asked. "Because you felt guilty about that morning?" Patricia nodded miserably. "I couldn't save Robert, but I thought I could save Max. I thought I could do right by Robert by taking care of his dog when you couldn't." George put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Patricia, honey, Robert made his own choice that morning, just like Elena made her own choices about how to grieve." "But what if he would have lived if I'd been more insistent?" Patricia asked. "What if I could have prevented all of this?" I found myself standing up and walking over to Patricia. Max followed me, as if sensing that something important was happening. I sat down on the coffee table in front of the couch, facing my friend directly. "Patricia, Robert didn't tell me about the chest pains either. If he had, I would have dragged him to the hospital immediately. But he made the choice not to worry me, just like he made the choice not to let you drive him." I took a deep breath. His heart attack wasn't your fault, and taking Max away from me wasn't going to change what happened to Robert. Patricia looked at me through her tears. "I just missed him so much, and I missed the life we all had together. Sunday dinners, game nights, walking the dogs together. I missed that too," I said softly. But taking Max away meant I lost even more of Robert than I had to. Max had positioned himself between Patricia and me, looking back and forth between us as if he understood the gravity of the conversation. "He really did lose weight while he was with us," Patricia admitted, "and he kept going to the window, looking down the street like he was waiting for someone." "He was waiting for me," I said, "just like I was waiting for him to come home." My mother spoke up from her chair. "It sounds like you were both grieving, just in different ways." Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue George handed her. "I thought I was protecting him, but I was really trying to protect myself from losing another piece of Robert." I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening of the anger I'd been carrying for weeks. "I understand that now. But Patricia, we could have grieved together. We could have helped each other." "I was so afraid you were going to fall apart completely," Patricia said, "like my sister did when her husband died. She just gave up on everything." "But I'm not your sister," I said gently, and you never gave me the chance to show you that I could handle my own grief." George cleared his throat. "Maybe we should talk about how to move forward from here, how to rebuild the friendship." But before anyone could respond, Patricia's expression changed suddenly, as if she'd just remembered something else. "There's more," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "About what Robert said during that phone call. About you, Elena." The air in the living room seemed to grow thicker as Patricia's words hung between us. I felt my heart skip in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Robert's final moments. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Patricia glanced at George, who gave her an encouraging nod. Max seemed to sense the tension and came closer to me, pressing his warm body against my legs. "When Robert called that day, asking if I could take Max for a few hours while you ran errands," Patricia began slowly, "he sounded different. Tired, but also worried about you." I felt my mother shift in her chair behind me. "Worried how?" Patricia looked directly at me. "He said you'd been having trouble sleeping since your doctor's appointment the week before. He said you were trying not to let him see how scared you were, but he could tell something was really bothering you." The room went completely silent, except for the soft sound of Max's breathing. I felt like I was falling through space, remembering that appointment, remembering how I'd tried so hard to hide my anxiety from Robert. "He was worried about your test results," Patricia continued. "He said the doctor wanted to run more tests, and you'd been pacing the house at night, checking and rechecking the appointment calendar." My mother's voice was gentle but concerned. "Elena, what test results?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of secrets I'd been carrying alone for weeks. "It was nothing. Just some routine blood work that came back with slightly abnormal numbers. The follow-up appointment was scheduled for the week after Robert died." George leaned forward. "Did you ever go to that follow-up?" "No," I admitted. "After Robert's funeral, I couldn't handle anything else. I kept meaning to call and reschedule, but every day felt like I was barely surviving." Patricia's eyes filled with tears again. "Robert made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you didn't neglect your health. He was so worried that you'd get so focused on taking care of everyone else that you'd forget to take care of yourself." I felt something break open inside my chest. Not the sharp pain of anger this time, but something deeper and more complex. "So when you took Max, I thought I was honoring that promise," Patricia said. "I thought if I took care of the dog, you'd have more time to focus on yourself. But I realize now that I took away the one thing that was actually helping you cope." My mother stood up and came over to sit beside me on the coffee table. "Sweetheart, you need to reschedule that appointment." "I know," I said quietly. "I've been putting it off because I was afraid of facing bad news alone." "You're not alone," Patricia said firmly. "You never were alone." "I just handled everything completely wrong." Max looked up at me with those understanding brown eyes, and I felt Robert's presence so strongly, it was almost like he was in the room with us. I could imagine him shaking his head at both Patricia and me, wondering why we'd made everything so complicated when we were supposed to be helping each other. "He really said that?" I asked Patricia. "About making sure I took care of myself?" Patricia nodded. "He said you were the strongest person he knew, but that your strength sometimes made you think you had to handle everything by yourself. He said that scared him more than his own health problems." George cleared his throat softly. "It sounds like Robert knew both of you pretty well." I laughed, but it came out shaky. He always said Patricia and I were too much alike for our own good, both of us trying to fix everything for everyone else. Maybe that's why this hurts so much, my mother said thoughtfully. You were both trying to protect each other, but in ways that made the other person feel shut out. Patricia wiped her eyes again. I should have just talked to you, should have asked what you needed instead of deciding for myself. And I should have told you about the test results instead of trying to handle my fear alone, I admitted. Max had settled at my feet, but I could see him watching Patricia with what looked like cautious interest, as if he was beginning to remember their friendship from before Robert died. There's something else, Patricia said, and my stomach clenched again. Robert asked me to give you something if anything happened to him. I've been carrying it around for weeks, not knowing how to give it to you after everything that's happened. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope with my name written on it in Robert's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope. Robert's handwriting looked so familiar, so alive, that for a moment I forgot he was gone. The careful way he wrote my name, the slight slant to his letters. It was like receiving a message from beyond. He gave this to you before he died? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The day before his last surgery, Patricia said softly. He said if something happened, I should wait until you were ready. But then, after I messed everything up with Max, I didn't know if I had the right to give it to you anymore. My mother reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Honey, do you want to open it now, or would you rather wait until you get home? I looked around the room at these three faces. Patricia with her red-rimmed eyes full of regret, my mother radiating steady support, and George sitting quietly respectful in his chair. Max was still at my feet, his warm weight grounding me to the present moment. I think I need to read it now, I said. With all of you here. Patricia nodded encouragingly. Robert would have liked that. He always said we were his family. I carefully opened the envelope, my fingers shaking slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Robert's neat handwriting. I unfolded it and began to read aloud. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my stubborn body finally gave up the fight. I'm sorry I had to leave you, but I need you to know some things. I paused, swallowing hard. My mother's hand found mine and squeezed gently. First, don't you dare blame yourself for anything. I know how your mind works, and you're probably convinced there was something more you could have done. There wasn't. You gave me more love and care than any man deserves, especially one as grumpy as me when I don't feel well. George chuckled softly at that, and I managed a small smile through my tears. Second, I need you to take care of yourself. And I mean really take care of yourself. Go to your doctor appointments. Don't put off that mammogram you've been avoiding. Don't try to be strong all the time. Let Patricia and your mom help you. They love you almost as much as I do. Patricia was crying openly now, and I had to stop reading for a moment to collect myself. There's more, I said, looking back at the letter. Third, please don't let grief make you forget how to live. You have so much life left in you, so much love to give. Take care of Max. He's going to miss me something awful, and you two will need each other. But don't let taking care of him be an excuse to hide from the world. Max looked up at me as if he understood his name, his tail giving a small wag. Finally, if Patricia is reading this with you, and knowing her, she probably insisted on being there when you opened it. Tell her thank you for being the sister you never had and the friend I never deserved. I'm counting on both of you to look after each other, even though you're both too stubborn for your own good. I looked up at Patricia, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. He knew us pretty well, didn't he? Too well, Patricia said with a watery laugh. I can practically hear him saying, "I told you so," about us fighting instead of helping each other. All my love always, Robert. P.S. Patricia, if you're being too pushy about the doctor appointments, Sarah has my permission to sick Max on you. The room fell quiet, except for the sound of tissues being pulled from boxes. Max had moved closer to me, his head now resting on my lap, as if he sensed the emotional weight of the moment. He planned for everything, didn't he? I said finally. That was Robert, George said gently, always thinking 3 steps ahead. My mother stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Patricia's backyard. You know, honey, I think he would have been pretty disappointed in how we all handled these last few weeks. Especially me, Patricia said quickly. I completely ignored what he actually asked me to do. Instead of making sure you took care of yourself, I took away the one thing that was helping you cope. I folded the letter carefully, holding it against my chest. We both messed up. I should have told you about being scared of the test results, and you should have asked me what I needed instead of deciding for yourself. So, what do we do now? Patricia asked. Max lifted his head from my lap and looked between Patricia and me, as if he was waiting for us to figure it out too. Now we do what Robert actually asked us to do, I said. We take care of each other. I'm going to call tomorrow and reschedule that mammogram appointment. I'll drive you, Patricia offered immediately. And I'll come sit in the waiting room with both of you, my mother added from the window. What about Max? I asked, looking down at him. Patricia's face fell slightly. He should come home with you. He was always your dog, and Robert's. I just borrowed him when I shouldn't have. Max seemed to sense the conversation was about him. He stood up, walked over to Patricia, and nudged her hand with his nose. Then he came back to me and sat down, but kept looking back at her. You know, I said slowly, maybe Max has the right idea. Maybe this doesn't have to be all or nothing. Patricia looked up hopefully. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Max could have 2 homes. Maybe he could spend some days with me and some days with you. That way, we'd have to see each other regularly, and neither of us could go too long without checking on the other. George smiled from his chair. Sounds like that dog is smarter than all of us put together. Robert would love that solution, Patricia said, her face brightening for the first time all afternoon. Joint custody of the world's most spoiled golden retriever. But we have to promise each other something, I said seriously. No more making decisions for each other without talking first. No more trying to protect each other by shutting each other out. Patricia nodded earnestly. And no more avoiding scary medical appointments. Deal, I agreed. Max gave a small bark, as if he was sealing the agreement for all of us.